want to get right to Colonel North and give you as much time as I can, Colonel. Thank you so much for coming on with us. Oliver North and I started working together back in 2007, and we've done a lot of traveling overseas. And a lot of people ask me, what's Colonel North like? And I just tell people he's not very good at being famous, because when you're famous, you're supposed to make lots of demands of people. You're supposed to be very flamboyant, and you're supposed to, have to have your green M&Ms in the green room, and you have to, that sort of thing. Colonel North is just a very, very humble, gracious gentleman. And I'll just to prove that, I'll tell you that when we traveled overseas together to Afghanistan and Iraq and Syria and everywhere, Colonel North would always do the laundry. He said, well, you do everything else, so I'll do the laundry. And besides, you don't know how to use fabric softener right, so I'm gonna do the laundry for us. And if you had ever told me back when I was a senior in high school, skipping classes to watch this Marine major or lieutenant colonel standing there and raising his hand before congressional committees, if you'd ever told me that guy was going to be washing my underwear one day, I would have said you were smoking crack. But there you go. So Colonel North, thank you for coming on with us. Take it away.
Glad I could, Chuck. By the way, we actually made a video, Chuck and I can't remember where we were. What the president had a word for.
I was in Afghanistan.
An asshole country. And I do the laundry. And we actually made a video of the proper way, because the real problem, folks, is you don't rinse enough. And by the way, Chuck was telling a little bit of a story there, because he doesn't wear underwear in combat. I'm not trying to give away too much, but there
Commando.
it is. And somewhere you still got that video, because we were actually
just went global.
It's a training video to get out there and show people how to properly do the laundry. Look at I'm a kept man on my wife's family farm in the Shenandoah Valley. It's springtime. The cows are calving. The cormorants and the herons are down fishing on the river right behind me. And I'm looking at eagles nesting and little hatchlings, out there screaming for mom and dad to bring back some chow. And the chow is normally just, a baby rabbit. That's the reality of life is in a place like this. And I look at this experience of the last month plus that we've been locked down. It's a wonderful opportunity to do a couple of things. Number one, to see the nature that's all around me. And I used to get up at 6 o'clock or 5:30 in the morning, race into Washington, D.C., which is 70 miles east of here for Fox News, and then return home late at night. Missed all of the kinds of springtimes for 17 years that I was with Fox News. And in godforsaken places that Chuck and I spent a lot of time in. This is an opportunity for me to see springtime out here. It's also an opportunity for me to spend time with our 18 grandkids. And I know that I'm supposed to keep washing my hands and wearing a mask, and I do when I go out to shop. But somebody said to me the other day as I'm coming out of, are we allowed to advertise Costco? I'm coming out of Costco. They don't have any toilet paper. They don't have any paper towels. They don't have any wipes left. And I brought them some fresh fish, wild caught fish. As I'm walking out of the place, the guy looks at me and says to me, he says, "Did you get any Lysol?" I said, "No, they're out of Lysol, but they've got some great salmon in there and it's on a sale." And he says, "Well, how come you're coming out here? Aren't you worried about this thing? Why don't you send somebody younger?" I said, "Well, I've got a lot of grandkids, but I'd have to drive them in anyway. And quite frankly, they wouldn't pick out as good a piece of fish as the one I just got here. But this is a wonderful opportunity for me to show my 18 grandkids, and this is my motivation, quite frankly, my 18 grandkids, what it's like to believe in Jesus Christ as their Lord and Savior." See, I'm not worried about it. I had Michael W. Smith on with on our show that we do two times a week. We do a podcast about encouraging people. If you want to see it, you go to olivernorth.com and click on the link. Just scroll down on the screen and you can see the episode we just posted, the edition with Michael W. on it. Michael says the same thing. He says, "I'm not worried. Look, I take the proper precautions. Don't get me wrong. I've got my N95 mask. I've got my gloves that I put on. And I take the precautions that you should. I wipe everything down. I'm actually wiping things down that I'd never wiped before, because the handrail coming up the stairs from downstairs. I'm in my garage. My office is over our garage. And yesterday I'm coming up the stairs. I got my hand on the drain. You know, I don't think I've ever wiped this railing down. And I wiped it down and it was black. It was gross. I don't know, 30 some odd years we've lived out here. I don't think I ever wiped it down once. And yet, so I'm learning to do things a little differently than I did before. One of the things that I want my grandkids to know, I want them all to come to know Jesus Christ like I know me, like I know him. And Jesus Christ knows me. It's one thing for me to say when I get there, oh, I know who he is. That's my Lord and Savior. Better yet is Jesus Christ is going to say, hey, don't throw him into hell. He might deserve to go there, but he's one of mine. And I would that mine be with me where I am for my greater honor and glory. Come on in, Oliver. Come on in. Now, that experience is the consequence of me seeing that as an example. And so when I was a young pup, I was a young major in the Marine Corps. We're getting ready to go overseas, and the battalion commander, who was a genius. I mean, first of all, Lieutenant Colonel John Grinolds was going to be a general. Everybody knew he would be. And second of all, he was a very bright guy. He's near the top of his class at West Point. I graduated from Annapolis. He's a Rhodes Scholar, an MBA from Harvard and Oxford, was a White House fellow, and everybody in the Marine Corps knew he was going to be a general. And so when he asked me to be his operations officer, the number 3 guy in a battalion landing team going overseas to the Mediterranean, I said yes. And so we started training together. I had gotten to know him well at headquarters Marine Corps. And everybody knew this guy was at the top of the heap. And he was handpicked for that assignment because this battalion's going off to do a pretty dangerous job. It was our sister battalion that got blown up in Beirut in 1983. It was the same Marine Expeditionary Unit that rescued Scott O'Grady. And it's a dangerous mission. We lost Marines on this trip. And so we're getting ready to go. I'm watching this man who was also secretly called a Bible thumper. He had one of these books that he carried with him. And he would be caught periodically on government time reading from it. And no one ever stopped him. He was a remarkable example to me. And so when he handed me a copy of this book on the day we deployed, he said to me, Oliver, you don't know your Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ. You have got to come to know him. Read this on the way across the Atlantic. It takes 12 days to go across the Atlantic and go into the Mediterranean Sea. I started at Genesis, almost quit. Couldn't figure out who he was. I'd never read this book before. And today, it's the only book I've ever read from cover to cover more than once. I've written a lot of books, novels, nonfiction, but this is the only book I've read from cover to cover more than once. I got to Leviticus and darn near quit. And then finally, I get to Matthew's Gospel, and there's something I can understand. There is a Roman infantry officer, a captain equivalent, called a centurion, means he commands 100 Roman troops, in a place called Capernaum. Every time that Betsy and I have led groups back to the Holy Land, we go to Capernaum because that's the place that changed my perspective on life. And I'm reading in this book about this centurion coming to Jesus Christ, who's probably on the steps of what the archaeologists have now unearthed, the steps of the synagogue. And it's probably a warm day. It's right on the Sea of Galilee. It's a fishing town. It's right up, it's a short walk to Magdala, where Mary is from, Mary Magdalene. And I'm reading about how the centurion comes to Jesus Christ and says, I've got a sick servant at home. In one of the translations of that same passage in Luke, it says, a slave, I've got a slave at home. Would you heal him? And Jesus says, sure, let's go. And by the way, all of this is in Matthew's Gospel, 8th chapter, verses 5 through 13. Read it, because this changed my life, along with the role model that John Grinolds had set for me, is how a believer behaves. And it changed everything about me. Jesus says, yeah, let's go. We'll go up on the hill, because the military barracks is always at that commanding terrain. So we'll go up the hill, and I'll go into your house and your barracks, and I'll heal your servant. And the Roman officer says, no, Lord, I'm a person of authority. I understand authority. I can tell someone to come, and they come. I can tell another to go, and they go. But all you need to do, Lord, is say the word, and my servant will be healed. And of course, in that very minute, he is. at that point, Jesus turns, according to the gospel, turns to the 12, who are all gathered up from that area of quite frankly, of what is today Israel. And he says to them, Peter included, greater faith than that in all Israel I have not seen. Why does he say that? Well, because as Josephus writes, the defector from the Jewish rebellion, who becomes a Roman general, who becomes the historian of the day, writes that in his book, The Jewish Wars. In his book, he describes the penalty for treason. The penalty for treason is death. The Roman army infantry officer knows that this Jesus is being watched. Jesus knows what the end of the story is. He's going to be nailed to a cross with his crime written on probably a piece of paper, a parchment above him. What's his crime? He knows that he's going to be accused of treason because there's only one king of the Jews, and that's Caesar, not Jesus. And Jesus is the king of the Jews. And so that's treason as far as the Romans are concerned. That is the crime that he commits, and that is why he's sentenced to death. And the Roman army infantry officer, according to Roman law, if you consort with a traitor, a seditionist, someone who's opposed to Caesar, if you consort with them, you are subject to the same sanction. The Roman army infantry officer has just risked his life for a servant, maybe a slave, certainly a subordinate. He's risked his life because others are reporting on who this Jesus is. Some of that information is going to the high priest in Jerusalem. Some of it's going to Herod. Some of it's going to Pilate. Jesus Christ knows the end of the story. And because I was changed by that story, I was changed because Lieutenant Colonel John Grinnells had set an example for me of what a Christian man is to be. Now, I tell you that story because in the aftermath of that, I'm given all kinds of opportunities to be that kind of example to some people I've never met. Chuck and I travel all over the world, usually to pretty miserable places. And we had the opportunity to set an example because Chuck and I both know the ends of the story, right? So I can be a chronic optimist. I know the end of the story. I know where I'm going and I know why I'm going there. It has nothing to do with how good a broadcaster, how good a Marine, how good a husband or father or grandfather I've been. It has everything to do with the fact that Jesus Christ died for me. And then as we celebrated on Easter, rose from the dead, so I don't have to go to hell. That's what I learned from the example of Lieutenant Colonel John Southey Grinnells and reading this book and knowing Jesus knows my name. I know where I'm going. If I've got time, do I have time, Chuck? Let me give you the one that inspires me most. I love reading the Psalms. I mean, there's some wonderful, wonderful words in here. I just want to go to Psalm 91, which is known as the soldier's psalm in many cases. But the one thing about it is it's got things that we're going through. Just let me read a couple of passages from it. He who dwells in the shelter of the Most High will rest in the shadow of the Almighty. I will say of the Lord, he is my refuge and fortress, my God in whom I trust. Surely he will save you from the fowler's snare and from the deadly pestilence. Here we are, right in the middle of a pestilence. He will cover you with his feathers, and under his wings you will find refuge. His faithfulness will be your shield and rampart. You will not fear the terror of night, which is the pestilence and the plagues, nor the arrow that flies by day, nor the pestilence that stalks in the darkness, nor the plague that destroys at midday. 1,000 may fall at your side, 10,000 at your right hand, but it will not come near you. You will only observe with your eyes and see the punishment of the wicked. You make the Most High your dwelling, even the Lord who is your refuge. That's the first 9 verses. Now, am I afraid of COVID-19? No. I know where I'm going and why I'm going there. And I brought my 18 grandkids, and they span from sophomore in college all the way down to a few months, right? But I want, in the time that the good Lord's given me, to show them, not just talk about it, but to show them how a believer lives, how a believer behaves, how a believer sets an example, the proper. Graham, your story was so powerful. And Vince, what you were talking about means so much. That's why we can do the things that we do, because the Lord gives us the strength to do it. You know, I tell the grandkids, you know, Granddad, what do you want to do? I said, what I want to do is, I've got a spot picked out at Arlington Cemetery where Betsy, Nan, they call her Nan because that's what Betsy called her grandmother. And Betsy and I are eventually going to be planted in that ground. It won't matter where we're planted really, because we'll be with the Lord. But I want, instead of all the medals and all the other stuff in the back of that, you're allowed to choose what you want on the back of that grave marker. And I want the words that are very powerful to me to be there. And they're powerful to me because I came to know my Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ, because of that word. And of course, 2 Timothy being at the end, probably the last letter that Paul wrote. He's in prison. He knows that Nero is going to have him killed. He knows that despite the fact that he's a Roman citizen, he's going to be given a chance to defend himself, but it's not going to work. He knows that. He's certain of it. And so he writes to Timothy, his protege, who at the time is in what we now call Turkey. And Timothy's down, and he's saying, Timothy, in the letter, come on and visit me. Bring the cloak, by the way. It's cold in this prison cell. And in it, he says the words I want on the back of my marker. He fought the good fight. He finished the race. And he kept the faith. You see, I spent my youth in an organization that had as its motto the word Semper Fidelis, from the Roman, from Latin. Whereas Semper Fidelis is more than a slogan. Always faithful is a way of life. Thank you, Chuck.